Yes.
Quiet.
Yes.
Luke, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. We will be having a few discussions, but other than that, please have your mics muted, of course, just to prevent feedback. But good morning. Welcome back to day 3 of SOS, the third and final day. Today, I think, is really interesting. All 3 breakouts right now, of course, are focusing on the COC, right? And hopefully all 3 of them are able to provide very direct deliverables for you all on how to actually directly improve these meetings. But this training session specifically is going to talk about engaging every Arrowman. And I think when we think about engaging, we think about taking someone who's asleep in the back of the room and making them active and engaged. And that's not quite what I mean today. And sometimes we think about engagement being a diversification and taking a small group of 4 or 5 of kind of the same person. Maybe you can think of these as lodge chiefs, and diversifying and spreading out and increasing your base. And that's not quite what I'm talking about either. We're also not talking about this type of engagement, clearly. Hopefully this will come to all of you at some point in time, but this isn't what we're going to be talking about either. What we really are talking about today, and what I really want to focus on, is the type of engagement that we see here in this transformation. You see on your left part of the screen, this previous picture, you have 1 or 2 people trying to focus, one guy really into it, but some people trying to distract him, some people trying to distract each other, goof around, mess off. They're not quite engaged. They're there, they're present, and we are increasing our diversification of our base, not only in ethnic, racial, gender diversity, but also in diversity of thought. We're increasing in that clearly. But what we aren't doing is making sure that all these people are engaged and active and listening and participating in the activity. And you don't have to agree, you don't have to be a yes man, but you do have to be engaged. You have to be involved and tactful and present. That's what we're focusing on today. How can we take these COCs and turn them from these events that only half of the people are listening to and paying attention to, and make all participants involved and engaged? So how do we do that? Well, today we'll talk about several opportunities to create that, including understanding the COC objectives. This is going to be our base. We're going to start by talking about all of the objectives of the COC, both in what we want to accomplish and who our base and who our audiences are, both individually and as a collective. We're going to start with our who and redefine the purpose and the format of an event based on the audience after we've established what that COC is and what it's supposed to accomplish. And then we're going to share and craft various engagement techniques. The one that I will present is called the URBACT method, which is a group funded by the EU, the European Union. We'll talk about that more later. And finally, we're going to start to begin to redefine and customize the COC for our audiences back home. So at the beginning of the session, it's very much engagement and discussion. But towards the end, I'll actually have you all break out for a few minutes and actually start to create an idea of who your who is, and then start creating actions on that. And you'll see in the workbook, you have space for that later on. And we'll get to that, and we'll wrap back up and share a few examples of what you all have come up with. So start thinking about that as we continue through the presentation. So for the first discussion point I want to ask is, what makes a COC good? Hopefully most of you have been to a COC. Hopefully you've been to a few good ones. What makes those COCs so good? Can anyone share? Hugh, have you been to a COC? Oh, Luke, go ahead.
I guess what I think of as a COC is when we get all of our discussion items done in a timely manner, as like a big part of what makes it good.
Yeah, anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I think one of the really key aspects of making a COC engaging is having multiple different speakers. So it's not just one person running the meeting, but you trade off across different people that can cover different topics.
That also kind of splits up, as a listener, that it splits up my time, I think. Let me figure out a way to explain this. If I'm listening to the same person for 15 minutes, about minute 3 or 4, I'm probably lost. Where if that person only has 3 or 4 minutes, right, and then the next person has 3 or 4 minutes, I have a break, I am re-engaged again, and I'm going to listen for the full 15 minutes, maybe even 20, but splitting that up makes it easier to comprehend and digest. Great point. Any other points?
Input from all lodges and people there.
People?
or input from everyone.
So I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, what is the COC for? I mean, we've talked about what makes it good, but let's back up a second. What is the purpose of a COC? What do we want to accomplish in a COC? What are its roles? Obviously, it's more than one. Would anyone like to share some ideas on how they use a COC or what they think a COC should be?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So a couple things about our Council of Chiefs is, first off, the main one that everyone will go to is planning a conclave. But after last year, and something my section's been doing for a while, is not just planning conclave, but also the new redefined role of the section, which is actually stated to give back to lodges and assist lodges. So that would be the second thing. And the third thing would be providing information from the national and region from like the sections to make sure our lodges are up to date with all the information that would be needed.
Yeah, great answer. I think that you very comprehensively established the back end or the leadership end of what a COC is for. Let's also think, though, about what a newly engaged youth might think a COC is for. If I walk in, or perhaps when you walked into your first COC, what did you first see? I'm like, oh, I get what this is about. This is what I think this meeting is going to be. These are the things that I think this is trying to accomplish. Anyone from C7 in this session, when you first walked into the Kalahari, do you have any recollect of what that was like? I don't know if anyone is here, but
hey, well, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, having it at the Kalahari when I was like a younger airman was really cool because not only would you kind of have to sit through all the meetings all day, but then you also have that big thing to look forward to on Saturday night, Sunday morning, whenever you guys decided to go. So always having some kind of like activity or something that people can look forward to is definitely something great. And obviously we continue it. I don't know if that started with you or whoever, but obviously we continue it, so it works and it's something we go back to every year.
Yeah, and I think I've seen a lot of different COC engagement techniques or activity techniques. I remember we had a fall COC at a golf driving range where people after the meeting could go and do that. I've seen some COCs at different camps, and they've had kind of a camp walk around. I know what a lot of people do is they have a COC at some point in time at the location of the section conclave for that upcoming year. So they kind of have a walkthrough, which is not necessarily like a extracurricular activity, but it is engaging and it's active based, walking around, talking, discussing, creating fellowship. Ideally, or ultimately perhaps, the COC is for a lot of different things, and it serves those things in different amounts, right? There is a little bit of COC that's just strictly business, trying to formalize budgets, accounts, dates, meetings. A lot of it is promotion, right? That the COC is an event that you can then hype up your next event for. Usually this is the section conclave that we think of. There's a lot of fellowship, right? As any good scouting event, it's a lot of community-based fellowship and discussion, so it's a lot of that, and that's perhaps the base or perhaps the medium that all of these other things happen through is that fellowship. But then we also have some of the topics that Jonathan talked about, which is lodge empowerment and enabling these lodges and preparing them and training them to become better. Sharing practices, providing people with opportunities to share what they think works for this mission, or say one lodge has a problem, the other one says, oh, we had that problem 3 years ago, here's what we did, right? It's a great opportunity through fellowship again to be able to create those connections and engage people. And then ultimately, kind of a catch-all is just leadership development in general. And this isn't just for people listening to trainings. This is also for the people giving the trainings, right? Leadership development is not just about training people, but also allowing people, just as a section officer is about leadership development, right? You in that role as a trainer or as anyone engaged in the COC having an active leadership role in that is also being able to be developed and then benefit not only the section, but the lodges as well. And I've seen probably every COC that I have gone to has done all of these things at some capacity, but one of the COCs that I went to was just absolute garbage for me, right? And this was actually during my term as chief. I would say February. I attended a COC from section C3B, and if you're from C3B, don't feel bad. But I attended this meeting down in Springfield, Illinois. I had just come back from a lodge LLD. And I get to this event, it's Saturday night. The rest of the meeting was going to be Sunday morning. So it was like a Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning COC. I show up, there's a lot of talking about budgets, talking about how they're going to prepare for section conclave, kind of in a smaller group. And then Sunday morning, they go back into the full business discuss their plans, discuss the theme. I give a training about, I honestly don't even remember what I gave a training about, but it doesn't really matter. I gave a training, and throughout that whole event, I was just so disengaged. I thought, this is just dumb. I don't care. I value their success as a section, and I want to see that happen. But for me personally, as an invested stakeholder, not as a Central Region Chief, just as Will, I just, none of it was for me. But that's what made it bad. Because ultimately, I talked to Jack Gunston afterward, their section chief at the time, and he said it was one of the most successful, productive meetings. And I could tell that for everyone else, it was very engaging. But it wasn't my section. The conclave didn't really relate to me. It didn't involve me. It wasn't my section. That's why it was bad. It wasn't that the actual event was bad. It's that it wasn't for me. It was planned very well. It was executed very well, but I just was not engaged. And again, I was there. I was listening, but I wasn't engaged. And that's the discussion or the discrepancy that I wanted to establish earlier. It's not about increasing your base. It's not about getting someone who's snoring to actually wake up. It's actually to get those people involved. And to do that, usually you have to give them a piece of that pie. You have to give them investment as well. And we'll talk about how to do that. But first, I want to ask, who do we think a COC is for? Obviously, it's not for people that aren't in that section. Maybe they're a special guest and they are able to kind of witness and see best practices for a COC. But who do we think a COC is ultimately for within your section? Who are the stakeholders? Who are those who we want to engage at a COC? So I'll turn it over to anyone who would like to share as well who they think a COC is for.
Lodge chiefs.
Lodge chiefs?
Your CVCs.
Yeah.
Your conclave.
Yeah, your conclave planning committee or vice chiefs.
Well, this might be a hot take, but I think COCs are for everybody.
Okay, but who is everybody? I knew someone was going to
the-
say this. I'm glad it was you, Robbie, because now I can grill you on it. Who is everybody?
I think it's all of the Arrowmen.
So are we gonna have 120,000 people show up to C7's Winter COC?
No, but we do have 300.
Yes, but that's not everybody.
I can jump in here and assist
Yeah.
in that question. It's when he says for everybody, I think we can more specifically say it's for the ones that are currently serving, but for the ones who are going to serve in the future. So the younger ones, the ones that we want to get involved in the Council of Chiefs, to get involved in the Order of the Arrow.
Yeah, and something that I talked about, I know that some of you were on my training session yesterday, something that I talked about yesterday in terms of when it comes to recognizing potential or perhaps building that bench, establishing that foundation for the next guys up. Let's think of these as rookies, right? Very, very rarely do rookies make a substantial effort or contribution to the team their first year, right? I mean, you obviously have these first-round picks, talking about football, you have these first-round picks who are kind of just ultimate stars, right? And they make a contribution. But still, even then, I don't think a rookie has ever won MVP, ever. So the contribution is often at a good size, but never that much. But every rookie on the winning team that wins the Super Bowl, still gets a Super Bowl ring, right? So yes, it is about getting those people ready for tomorrow, but it's about getting them ready for today as well. And we can't forget that. We can't just say, oh, the future is here, we're ready for the future. The future is now. It's not tomorrow, it's now, right? But Robbie, you bring up a good point because it ties into this next part about who this everybody is. Because ultimately we are for everybody. I said yesterday again, I'll say it today. The Boy Scouts of America's niche is that it's a one-stop shop for anyone and everyone who wants to engage in hundreds of different activities, leadership development activities, et cetera, recognition. And that's why I want to redefine or reshape what this golden circle looks like. How many of you are familiar with the golden circle? I hope a good amount. The golden circle is this concept usually used in businesses, in ethical business leadership and ethical development and marketing and focus about that people don't really buy what you do, they buy why you do it, right? You'll see an ad about some app that this company wants you to download and you're like, oh, it can make you a bunch of money, but you're like, it kind of seems fishy, kind of seems scammy, right? Or a company says, hey, we really value these 3 principles. We really value community development, we value this and this. And we're like, really? Do you really? Because we just think that you want to make money, right? And these are all just facades that you're putting up to get us to invest into your company. So that's why we can't just tell them what we do. We have to provide, not only if you're running a business, your potential investors, your potential buyers and consumers, not just what you do, but why you do it. But in the order of the arrow, and I would argue, and I know Ted Weiland would argue as well, because he's the one who's kind of made this adjustment in the beginning, is that we should start with why before what, but we ultimately should really understand who we are and who we are serving, not just the people in this room, the SOS officers, the staff, those involved at the region and section levels, but also who we're for, right? Because we must define who we are and who we serve to know why we serve them. So who are we? We unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, aren't starting a new business. You know, we aren't starting from scratch. We have a foundation of 100+ years, not just in the OA, but in Boy Scouts, of who we are. And we can look to who we are in our mission. And we're going to focus on the Order of the Arrow here specifically. But the mission of the Order of the Arrow is to fulfill its purpose as an integral part of the BSA through positive youth leadership under the guidance of selected capable adults. So we're seeing positive youth leaders. We're seeing capable adults that are able to develop those leaders. We're also seeing that we're a part of the BSA. We're not autonomous from them. We aren't separate. We are a part of, an integral part, but nevertheless a part. And then we can look to the purpose. We recognize those who best exemplify the Scout law and oath in their daily lives through recognition. And hopefully that recognition then causes others to act in a similar way that warrants similar recognition, right? Very rarely do I see a Eagle Scout Court of Honor who is for that Eagle Scout. Yes, they are being recognized, but the most impactful part of any Eagle Court of Honor are those in attendance. When I was a youth, maybe a second class, first class Scout, going to my troop mates' Court of Honors inspired me to become that way as well and hold myself to that level. And that's the real impact that any award has, right? Is that that person hopefully is leading themselves in a life of strong character, and that will inspire others to do the same because of those moments of recognition. We promote camping and responsible outdoor adventure, environmental stewardship. We develop leaders with the willingness, character, spirit, and ability to advance activities of their own units, going back and serving those that they come from. And our brotherhood in scouting as well, not just our units, but the larger mission. And finally, we crystallize the Scout habits, which are all these three previous things, but also specifically the Scout habit of helpfulness into a life purpose of leadership and cheerful service to others. So let's condense this down as quickly as we can, right? We are recognition, and not just for the sake of recognition, but the sake of development and encouragement. We are an outdoor program. We focus on leadership development and cheerful service. Those are the four things that we stand for in our purpose. And who we are in terms of who our audience is, right? Like these are the four things that we are. We are these four: recognition, outdoor program, leadership development, cheerful service. That's us. Who we serve are youth seeking development and adults seeking development. Oftentimes, especially when I was a lodge chief, I often thought that my lodge advisor should be this perfect stone, already formed, great, perfect person. Well, a lot of the role of the lodge advisor is also developing that advisor into a better person as well, right? And we can't forget that we're constantly changing, we're constantly adapting. That doesn't just stop at 18 or 21. That's a consistent life process that never ends. Let's move on. We've established the who. Let's move on to the why. Why do we do these things? Why are we those four? Well, because it helps develop leaders. It provides service to others, which is mutually beneficial. And it strengthens today to make it easier tomorrow. Again, the future is today. We want to strengthen this today because then tomorrow will be a little easier. But then tomorrow, we're going to strengthen that day as well for the next day after that. How do we do this? Well, we provide leadership opportunities and leadership development opportunities, and we empower youth to make their lodges better so that they can empower in turn, right? Ultimately, and especially with Thrive Connect, the focus is that we are able to leave these lodges in a better state that they are then able to address their problems. We can't just come in and fix everything, right? Because that doesn't develop them as leaders. We want to empower them and give them the tools necessary to grow so that they then can grow once we have left. And then what does this do? Like, what do we do that does these things? How do these key principles manifest themselves? Well, section conclave probably being the biggest one, especially for section officers. NOAC and special events. OA High Adventure is a great example. But what we're here to talk about today is the COC. And so we've already come back. Let's come back to what a COC manifests, right? Business. We can see some of these key terms that we are, lodge empowerment and leadership development. Hopefully through those things and sharing practices and fellowship, we can inspire and crystallize these habits of helpfulness and cheerful service and a positive, bright attitude. But this isn't as so far helpful as who a COC is for, and all of these different airmen. And similarly, you'll have different airmen engaged at different levels, right? That you, a section officer, are going to be very engaged. And Olivier, who we'll talk about in a second, is going to be very engaged as well. But then you have some people like Alex and Megan and Naomi who aren't as invested. But the COC is equally for them as it is for you. And so we must engage them in a way that brings them in just as much as we are. So who are these people? Well, I've kind of created these Arrowman archetypes. And I think that they're pretty good. I think that I leave one kind of blank for you to kind of fill in. But I do think that we experience these people quite often. So for example, Alex is a newly inducted middle schooler who loves reading and tennis, and he's very passionate about what he does. But he hates spiders, so do not ever show him a photo of a spider. The COC is his first event, not just at the section level, but at the lodge level. He was just inducted back in the fall, and now he's coming to your COC. This is his first event. And he knows nothing about section and lodge operations. His lodge chief just said, oh, you have to come to this thing. It's going to be a great time. You don't want to miss out. And so he says, OK, and he shows up. So that's Alex. And I think we've all experienced people like Alex. So our second type is Naomi. And by the way, these images, I just Google searched this name and found what I thought was the best image. So I kind of had fun with this. But this is, of course, tennis player Naomi Osaka. Naomi is a Brotherhood member in addition to tennis. Her and Alex get along quite well. She's a chapter chief and enjoys spending time with friends. She really enjoys that camaraderie. So she often comes to these events for the fellowship opportunities. However, she's really creative and she's well equipped with OA knowledge. She's invested. Obviously, she's a Brotherhood. She sealed her membership. She's a chapter chief. She wants to be engaged. She wants to take that leadership opportunity. But this person is also kind of that middle ground person who isn't quite the newbie, but isn't quite the established leader who has a lot of presence and respect. So they kind of try to goof off to try to impress others and crack jokes that are kind of inappropriately timed and really aren't to place at the COC. So they're kind of half engaged as well, right? That they're trying to make that next step. But they also worry about their social capital, and they're trying to establish that and kind of goof off. And that becomes a distractor to us as people running the COC. Then we have you. You're the section officer and advisor. You're running the meeting. This is your fourth COC, and this is by far the most stressful day. You look like this man from the TV show You, who's just looked absolutely slumped. He hasn't gotten a week of sleep, and just is running on very, very, very last-minute fumes and maybe 2 or 3 Starbucks coffees. Then Olivier, who you know very well because he makes his presence very known. He's a 15-year-old prodigy who everyone thinks is the chosen one, right? He has Ener Goodman poster on his bedroom wall, so when he falls asleep, that's the last thing he sees. He cannot wait to become the next national chief, and he makes sure you know that he can't wait to do that, right? He is, again, a great archetype that we don't experience as often as perhaps Alex or Naomi, but definitely is still present. And we can't just disengage that person and say, oh, they don't get it, let's just dismiss them. Because this event, ultimately, as Robbie said, is for everyone. Not just those that we want to engage, but those who we kind of want to disengage a little bit or re-engage in a new way. And then Megan the Stallion, of course, is the newly inducted adult advisor. The lodge has brought her on for a variety of reasons, also just because her troop elected her, right? And she wants to get involved in the lodge, but she really doesn't know a lot about the OA. And I'm going to give you guys about a minute to kind of fill in this based on what you have seen, right? I've talked about a lot of archetypes, and we have one more archetype that I definitely know everyone has experienced. But for this one, I want you to kind of think about some of the gaps or some of the archetype gaps that you think of. And this doesn't just have to be Megan. You can expand this beyond an adult advisor, but just kind of jot down some ideas. I'll give you till, let's say, 58, 2 minutes to the hour. Is that correct? Is that correct time? Yeah, 58, so 2 minutes to think about some of the gaps that we have in the archetypes so far. While we're waiting, does anyone want to share what they filled in for Megan? Hugh, what have you filled in for Megan?
Yeah, so Megan, she's a newly inducted adult advisor, and she's mostly here for her kid. Her kid, Jimmy Scout, was inducted last year, and Jimmy Scout is now a chapter vice chief, and he's here at this COC meeting. But she's kind of new to scouting in general. She hasn't really participated, so she doesn't quite understand that whole youth leadership thing. She doesn't understand that the 20-year-old standing in front of her is actually in charge and not the 40-year-old standing off in the sidelines. Did you want me to talk about the things that would engage her as well?
We'll get to that later, but that's actually way better of an archetype than I would have came up and way more realistic than anything that I had written down. So we're just gonna stop with that. Hopefully the camera will end up working here soon. But that also is definitely not, I think that some people might think that this, that Megan might be Michael. Now, I know we've all seen Michael. He's this big old dude who thinks everything you do is just dumb. And he hates kids and likes sitting. This is actually my grandfather. His name is not Michael, but it could be. And he loves kids, but this photo, I think, perfectly encapsulates what we think of when we think of that. Like this old, stubborn advisor who is very status quo, or we think is very status quo, right? And because of these, now we've established these archetypes, now that we've established who we're for, let's redefine the purpose of the COC, right? And so the approaches to change, I'm just gonna, yeah. So the approaches to change that we have, or the three approaches that I think are commonly used, are a change in delivery, right? So if your COC is very business focused, you can change the delivery in the way in which you create that change, or that you deliver that same content, right? The content is the same, you're changing the delivery. Or if it's too interactive and people are just bouncing off the walls excited because you're just all activity, then you provide a more formal business approach. Hopefully it's somewhere in the middle, no matter which way you're coming from, but you're changing the delivery. The second way is to change the content, right? So the content itself is either more fun if you're more business-focused content, or more business if it's just more fun, just all trainings about development and personal development, right? And so you're actually getting more of a business aspect out of the content itself. And both of these are often used, and I have seen them used not just for COCs, but for companies and for trainings of all sorts. When we went to the NLS Rewrite program, we both changed the delivery and the content of what we were creating. But the third approach, which I want to focus on here, is actually an increase in content, which is, I think, the most common form, right? Especially with this SOS, we've increased the content. We've created these 3 options within a session time, right? We've created breakouts. We've decreased the size of who people are with, right? To create a more of a smaller, close-knit feeling, which is just the difference between liberal arts college classes of 15 to 20 people, maybe 30, to larger state schools where you're sitting in a lecture room of 130 to 200 people. Which classroom do you usually feel more engaged in? Usually the smaller classroom, right? I know we were talking to C4 yesterday about creating training tracks, and that's another common theme, especially at COCs and section conclaves specifically. But I think all of these are useful, and one of the ways that I think COCs, specifically an engagement technique that I think could really deliver at COCs, relates to a group called URBACT, which is an urban planning focused company and group sponsored by the European Union, right? And their whole focus is to drive change for better cities. And this model on the right is somewhat important, so I'm just going to kind of skim over it. If you're interested in URBACT, I've done a good amount of research on it, and I'd be more than willing to talk to you about it later. But their development approach takes information and relationships from all levels of government and local players in cooperation, as you can see in the top right. It creates cooperation between neighboring municipalities across different policy areas and departments of a municipality, and all of those 3 things, so a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach, and a side-to-side approach in terms of that city's relationship to other areas, other neighboring cities, and then also internally within different departments. It takes that and tries to maintain a balance between the hard physical investments, which you could think of more monetary, structural, built, and soft social investments, which could be community.
And an event that they host quite often, which I want to specifically focus on, are what are called city festivals, Urbach city festivals. So they'll host, every year they'll have an annual meeting where people and Urbach representatives from all of the European countries will come together and meet and discuss their progress and their updates. And the way that that works organizationally is that each country has a representative that kind of promotes and keeps their nose to the ground and their ear open to those in that country. That country can have cities apply for grants and funding and also access to this Urbach structure, which is really what it provides. And we similarly, I think a great tie-in is that we similarly want to see this SOS and Thrive Connect as a similar way, right? Again, we do not want to come in and solve a city's problems or solve a lodge's problems. We want to enable them and give them the resources and the structure necessary to then enable them and solve their own problems. And Urbach is the same way, where Urbach comes in, has these city festivals, and enables people through a variety of different activities to then go back and have a structure in mind and an approach in mind to then move forward and approach their own. And they do provide funding, and a lot of cities get that funding and then are able to use bomb shelters for community spaces, et cetera, et cetera. But this city festival, what they do is they take all these people. There's a lot of Oliviers in here. I'm sure there's some Megans. I'm sure there are some Alexes as well. And they divide them up into groups that have probably never met before. Maybe there are a few connections already. But then they give each group a project and an assignment. And then that group then works through that program, works through that project, and tries to provide a solution to that. And why is this so good for COCs? Well, first of all, you're getting that engagement that we talked about earlier, that true engagement of everyone involved. Not everyone trying to say, yes, this is great, but everyone involved and engaged and active. You're shortening or creating the groups that are much smaller for truer, genuine, very invested engagement. And you're also creating new friendships, new fellowships, leadership development, team building, allowing people to work with people they've never worked with before, understand strengths and weaknesses. And then as a section, you get a bunch of, I mean, this Rubens probably has, what, 7, 8 groups? You get 7, 8 problems addressed, right? And maybe they're not all great, but definitely half of them are going to be. And they're going to be a start. I think some examples could be, what are some new things we want to see in the trading post? What are some new items that we want to see addressed in the trading post? Or perhaps a more tangible lodge-focused event group could be, how can the section create a lodge sister program to pair up lodges with each other that perhaps have opposite strengths and weaknesses? The possibilities are endless in terms of what you can assign these groups to. And this does a lot of things that engages even Naomi or even Alex or someone who is usually very disengaged, because their value in a small group is very clearly and directly counted, mattered, and listened to, right? Not only are they listened to at the table, but they have a seat at that table. And then they seem engaged, they seem active, and then they also are invested in that idea. And so these subgroups can then often become project leads or group leads for that project moving forward. Because obviously you can't create and finish a lodge sister program or LLD resources in an hour or two. But you can get the ball rolling. And that's what the COC can really be about. And then that small group then stays connected. Perhaps you assign a leader to each of the groups to kind of just hold accountability that you trust and move forward with that and have that group invested. Then you're investing in, let's say C7 brings another 300 with C1B to the next conclave, right? They have, or a COC. They have a joint COC again, and they have 300 between the two of them. There are not 300 positions, even amongst all those lodges, leadership positions, right? There just aren't. But you have now enabled them and given them an investment and created a team for them to work on. So you've given them investment, you've invested in them, and allowed them to invest in return. They're going to pay dividends later on. They feel empowered. It's a very small level of commitment, right? And this is just one technique. We've got about 5 minutes left. Just to kind of wrap up the Urbach method. Does it empower lodges? Yes, because it solves their issues. Does it promote? Yes. Does it address business issues? Yes. Does it share practices? Absolutely. That's probably the core of this. Does it create fellowship? Yep. And does it develop leaders? Of course. So it's checked off these 6 pillars that I've kind of come up with. I mean, obviously, give or take a few of them, add a few, change them, right? But these 6 very general COC purposes, it checks off all of those. Does it engage Alex? Yes, it gives him information about what this order is doing. It very clearly invests in who he is, A, and it gives him more information about what we do by telling him what we do and then having him then do it. Naomi seems cool because she gets to take charge in a smaller group. She doesn't have to goof off and gain attention from 100. She can actually invest and do things in a smaller group. You're delegating. You're absolutely tired. You're just bonkers exhausted. This gives you a chance to drink some coffee and kind of walk around as a spectator, make sure that everything is going okay. It also gives you variety. This is your 4th COC. There are several people at your event that are coming to 4th, 5th, 6th, 12th COCs. These people are now engaged and active in different things. And you can use the Urbeck method at every COC and still have it be different every year, right? Have new people in different projects, different events. It gives Olivier an assignment. Perhaps he's one of the team leads. You allow him, you delegate, and give him an opportunity to lead and show what he's capable of while still maintaining that and creating a relationship with him. Megan is involved within youth. As Hugh said, her son is in this. She doesn't really know what's all going on, but she gives her some more of that information, and she gets to be able to see what that's like, just like Alex. But it also engages her in a way with other people, which she really obviously loves. She wouldn't be doing this if she didn't enjoy spending time with kids. Hopefully she wouldn't have a kid if she didn't enjoy kids, right? And then Michael gets to sit. So he's happy too, right? He is pleasant as pleasant can be. We have achieved this level of active, genuine engagement. We've got about 3 minutes. If there are any other successful and sustainable, not eco-friendly, I mean, yes, eco-friendly, but more the ability to continue and the ability to thrive long-term. Are there any engagement techniques that anyone would like to share the last minute or two? If not, we'll move on to the last bit of your worksheet. You can see at the bottom this crafting a new COC. Hopefully you're able to come up in your section breakouts here that'll start in 3 or 4 minutes with some other general engagement techniques. I think something that COC does, as Robbie mentioned, is we invite everyone after our event to spend time in the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, which is a great opportunity for them to kind of have fun, go swimming, meet new people. I know that, well, what is now the Kone Lodge, I called them Lakota yesterday, but the Kone Lodge and Walapi Lodge have a water basketball tournament every year. And so that's engaging people, getting them to stay active with the promise of something later. We have a lot of icebreakers. I mean, there are a lot of things here, but what I want you to focus on these last minutes and as you move forward is who your who is, right? We've got these archetypes up at the top, but start thinking about your based on the purpose and the mission, but also what your section's goals and who you are and who you serve and how you do that. And then move, well, why do we do this? Why are these the things that we want to accomplish? And then say, how are we going to accomplish them? And then what is that going to look like? Or perhaps a better way to phrase that, what will that manifest? How will that come to life? What will that product look like at the front? Wrapping up, I hope that we have been able to understand what the COC is for and craft various engagement techniques to solve these issues that we have faced in terms of genuine engagement. We started with our who, and I encourage you to move forward and start with your who as well, and not your why, but both of those kind of simultaneously, with the core being who you're for and who you are. And then starting to redefine and customize your own personal COC experience. Obviously, this next breakout is going to be focusing on that a lot, as you all have gone to COC events. And so start thinking about what that's going to look like for you and how that's going to manifest and how that is going to become what your COC is. Again, I'm available. I think most of you have some form of communication with me. Feel free to email me, text me, DM, whatever you need to do if you're interested more about what Urbeck does or anything we've talked about today. But with that, I wish you well and hope to hear from you all soon.